We are going to talk about the African Development Bank. They are meeting in the Ivory Coast this week to pick a new president, and this comes at the time when Africa's economic growth is impressive in certain regions and not so much in certain regions. 5 candidates were told. 1 from here in South Africa, there's 1 from Senegal, Zambia, Chad, and Mauritania, vying to replace the outgoing president, Akinwumi Adesina, who is going to step down in September after serving the maximum 2 5-year terms. The winner must secure the 50+1 votes from 54 African member states of the bank. In a second vote from all 81 members, including non-African ones, will be announced on Thursday. In South Africa, we also have a candidate whom I was told that is very, very, very capable. That is Swazi Shabalala Bajabulile, a banker with 30 years experience, senior vice president of the bank, and a sole female candidate whose focus, we are told, would be on transforming the bank if she takes over the helm. The president of the Association of Black Securities and Investment Professionals, Polo Leteka-Radebe, joining us on the line. Good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, TK. Thanks for having me, and good evening to your listeners.
Thank you so much. This particular bank as an institution, first and foremost, how significant is its role on the continent?
Oh, it's very, very significant. I mean, this is a multilateral institution that is funded by governments across the world, not just African governments. Mm-hmm. And its primary role is to drive the economic development of the African continent. And I think its role has become even more pronounced. The importance thereof has become even more pronounced now with the adoption of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, which seeks to integrate Africa, which seeks to ensure that there's increased trade amongst African countries, which is meant to unlock trillions of US dollars in economic activity across the continent. Africa is said to be the last frontier. So this institution will play a very critical role in ensuring that we realize that economic potential of this continent.
How would you reflect on its success thus far, the African Development Bank?
Look, the African Development Bank has played a catalytic role in driving a lot of infrastructure development in a lot of underserved economies across the continent. What it has not been able to succeed in doing, of course, is that integration bit. So it will intervene in South Africa on one project, it will intervene in Nigeria on another project, but we have not been successful in ensuring that there's that regional integration from an economic trade perspective. And I think that's probably where you could find fault with the bank. But I think they've been pioneering in terms of thought leadership. I mean, they are the ones who came up with the 5 pillars of how to develop and integrate Africa. They've got themes such as Light Up Africa, Industrialize Africa, Improve the Lives of Africa, Integrate Africa, and all of those themes are really around infrastructure development, ensuring that there's a railroad from Cape to Cairo, as it were. I mean, right now, if you think about it, when you go to other parts of the African continent, when I travel to Morocco, for instance, I have to fly into Europe, and then from Europe fly back into Africa, because there's no direct flight straight from South Africa to Morocco, which is a little bit ridiculous, and it makes trade and integration between, say, North Africa and Southern Africa almost impossible, because the costs are they just make it impossible to do it in a cost-effective manner. So I think they've been pioneering and catalytic in just the thought leadership. They write a lot of papers around how we can look at our competitiveness as individual countries and how we leverage off our comparative advantages as countries, so that each one of us can benefit from the other, so that we do not reinvent the wheel. So from a thought leadership perspective, I cannot fault them. But I think just from a practical implementation perspective, and it's not so much their fault, I think it's really the fact that we are one continent, but we are not heterogeneous. We are very disparate. Our regulated environments are very different, sometimes at loggerheads with each other. So the implementation of the Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement, where, amongst other things, we have to ensure that there's alignment from a regulatory perspective between the various countries, will help the African Development Bank actually better achieve its intended objectives.
And what then becomes or informs the inclusion of some of the G7 nations that are part of this African Development Bank, Japan among them, the US among them?
Well, what informs them is that the world understands that if Africa does not prosper, the world cannot prosper. If Africa does not become self-sustaining and less dependent on aid and handouts, it does create geo and socio-political challenges across the world. So you want Africa to be stable politically, you want Africa to be stable socially, so that as we advance as Africans, we have more stability. Economic growth means that Africans will stay on the continent to build their continent because they have opportunities for growth and development within their own continent. But hopefully Africa can also start exploiting its own resources for its benefit, because historically that we had, we've never really sufficiently benefited from them. We essentially just extract these resources, and then we export them in their raw form, and then they come back as much more expensive products that we cannot afford. So if Africa is able to industrialize and start to beneficiate, for instance, we can then start also selling high-value items to the rest of the world, meaning that it will require us, of course, to build the skills in order for us to do the beneficiation and produce high-value items, which means that we can start really operating at the same level as our counterparts on the rest of in the rest of the world.
I see Nigeria is the biggest shareholder in the African Development Bank. What informs that, and to what advantage does that serve for Nigeria, if at all?
I'm not aware that they are the largest shareholder, actually. I thought that the Europeans were the largest shareholders.
So the Europeans are not Nigeria, the Europeans?
No, it's the Europeans. African Development Bank is mainly funded. Japan is probably one of the largest funders of the African Development Bank, to be honest. So I wouldn't say. I think Nigeria just has a prominence in that, the outgoing president is Nigerian. But certainly from a contribution perspective, no, they are not the largest investor in the African Development Bank.
Yeah. So what then? For somebody that might be worried that this is such an important bank, that the process of voting for the candidate, is it political, or is it purely based on what African countries in particular think is the best person out of the five?
Well, one would hope, TK, that is the best person for the job, right? But if we are being realistic, this is a highly politically contested terrain. There's a lot of behind-the-scenes lobbying, government to government, both across the region. Even at a regional level, we've got regional bodies. So maybe, ideally, for instance, in this case, the SADC region should have gone with one candidate. Unfortunately, we've got a candidate from Zambia and South Africa, which is not ideal, because we would have been much more strengthened if we'd gone into the race as a regional bloc, as a SADC bloc, and had one candidate. But that didn't work out in this particular instance. But typically, if you were to look at the history of the voting and the candidacy of the African Development Bank, you typically have a candidate from each region across the continent. And then what then the regions do is they then negotiate amongst themselves to say, we think, this candidate should win versus the other candidate. Of course, it's always an African that typically heads the bank, but ultimately the people that make the decision are the investors in the African Development Bank, which then spills over, the politics then spill over into Europe and the Asia area and the Americas as well.
So, who are you rooting for?
It's obvious. Do I have to? Come on. Some questions need not be asked. I think.
Is it Swazi?
I think firstly, Swazi is a member of APSIP, of our association. So she has been a pioneer. She was a pioneer in the financial services sector. She understands transformation. She doesn't speak transformation. She does transformation. We have seen her. She was one of the first black women to head up Treasury at Transnet in the mid-90s. I was there when I was still doing my articles. She was in the Treasury Department of Transnet. It was unheard of at the time to have a black person, let alone a black woman, heading up a Treasury Department. She has been a pioneer even at the African Development Bank itself. She was vice president for finance, a job she did excellently. I think her track record speaks for itself. She understands the continent. She understands economics. She understands finance. She understands the challenges that we face. At Transnet, she would have had to deal a lot with issues around infrastructure and infrastructure development because Transnet is at the center of rail infrastructure, as you know. So these are things that she knows, she breathes, she's lived for more than 30 years. So, and of course, she's a woman. We don't have women being presidents of the African Development Bank. I cannot recall, maybe I might be mistaken, but the last few presidents I remember of the African Development Bank were all male. It's time for women to rise. It's time for women to show what we are capable of as leaders. And I think Swazi has proven herself as a leader, whether she's a woman or not, just as a leader, as a transformative leader, as a highly intelligent person. I've had the pleasure, of course, of engaging with her on many occasions. So I can attest to her intellectual capability. And she's a great thinker. So we need somebody who understands. She understands the world. I mean, she also studied overseas. So she doesn't just understand Africa. She understands the world. And it's important when you are in this role to understand the politics of the world, the issues of the world, but also understanding the African continent at large and its challenges. Yeah.
Well, in that case, we are all rooting for her. And apologies because I was misled by Google, because Google says to me that Nigeria totals 4.4 billion, making it the largest investment in Africa. So please pardon me for that. Sometimes when we read this information, we get ahead of ourselves and confirm it. But thank you so much, ma'am, for talking to us.
Yeah, most welcome and all the best. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And go Swazi.
No, we are with Swazi all the way. We are with Swazi all the way. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thanks a lot. Polo Leteka-Radebe, President of the Association of Black Securities and Investment Professionals.